Ever feel like your virtual machines are stuck in second gear? Like they could be performing so much better, but something's holding them back.
It's kind of like having a sports car, but only ever driving it in the city, right? All that power just waiting to be unleashed.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, those hidden techniques, those secret tweaks that can really make your VMs sing. We're going beyond the basics. This is about squeezing out every last drop of performance.
Think of it like fine-tuning a high-performance engine. Every little adjustment, every tweak can make a difference.
Now we've got some really interesting research lined up for today's deep dive, stuff even some seasoned techies might not know about. And I'm excited to jump right in, especially when it comes to the concept of load balancing.
Load balancing. It sounds a bit, well, technical, doesn't it?
It does, but trust me, it's way more interesting than it sounds. Think of it this way. Ever been on a website, right in the middle of something important, and suddenly, bam, it crashes?
Oh, yeah, I've been there. Super frustrating.
The worst, right. Well, that can happen when a server gets overloaded with too many requests. Load balancing is all about preventing that from happening to your VMs.
Okay, so it's like making sure no single VM is carrying too much weight, distributing the workload.
You got it. It's like having a team of movers instead of just one poor guy trying to carry the entire piano up the stairs. And the interesting thing is, there are different approaches to load balancing. Our sources point to three main types: static, dynamic, and hybrid.
So which one you choose depends on the situation, I'm guessing.
Exactly. It's about finding the right tool for the job. Let's start with static load balancing. Imagine a large e-commerce site that gets a pretty consistent flow of customers throughout the day.
Okay, so their traffic is relatively predictable.
Right. In that case, static balancing would predefine how traffic is distributed across the servers. It's reliable, it's straightforward.
Sounds like a good option for a lot of cases. But what happens when things get a bit more, well, unpredictable?
Our sources actually highlight a case study where a company was using static load balancing during a flash sale. They hadn't accounted for the sudden surge in traffic.
Uh-oh. That doesn't sound good.
It wasn't. Their site slowed to a crawl, customers got frustrated, some probably even left without buying anything. It was a mess.
So what could they have done differently? Is that where dynamic load balancing comes in?
You nailed it. Dynamic balancing is all about adaptability. It constantly analyzes traffic patterns in real time and automatically adjusts how resources are distributed.
So if that company had dynamic balancing in place during their flash sale,
Their system would have been able to handle that sudden influx of shoppers without breaking a sweat.
okay, that makes sense. But you also mentioned something called hybrid load balancing. What's that all about?
Hybrid is all about combining the best of both worlds. You might have some traffic that's predictable, some that's not. So you use static rules for the predictable stuff, dynamic adjustments for those unexpected spikes.
So it's about having the flexibility to handle whatever comes your way. Pretty smart.
Exactly. It's like having a Swiss Army knife for managing your VM workload. Now, all this talk about proactively managing resources and, anticipating those bottlenecks before they even happen, it makes me wonder, are there tools that can actually help us do this in the real world? Like, what are the pros using?
Oh, absolutely. And our sources actually highlight some pretty amazing tools that are out there. Load Runner is a big one.
Load Runner, yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard that name before, but honestly, I'm not entirely sure what it does.
So Load Runner is kind of like the ultimate stress test for your VMs. You can simulate these massive traffic loads, way beyond what you normally see.
Okay, so you're really putting your VMs through their paces.
Exactly. And by doing that, you can identify any bottlenecks or weaknesses in your system before they become a problem in the real world.
That's amazing. So it's like having a crystal ball for your VM performance.
Pretty much. Now, if you're working with cloud-based VMs, which is more and more common these days, there's another tool called Site 24/7. That's a real game changer.
Site 24/7. Okay, so is this specifically for like AWS, Google Cloud, that kind of thing?
You got it. It provides 24/7 monitoring of your cloud performance, sends you alerts if anything looks fishy. It's like having a dedicated team watching over your VMs around the clock.
That sounds incredibly valuable, especially with how complex cloud environments can be these days.
Yeah.
But, I'm curious about something. What if you're running a hybrid setup? Like you've got some VMs on-premise, some in the cloud. What do you use then?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for those hybrid environments, Manage Engine Applications Manager, it's a really powerful tool.
Manage Engine Applications Manager.
Yeah.
Okay, and what makes that one stand out?
So it can monitor both your physical servers and your cloud resources all from a single dashboard. So you get this unified view of your entire VM landscape.
That makes a lot of sense, so you're not jumping between different tools and trying to piece everything together yourself.
Exactly. And it gives you the insights you need to optimize performance across your entire infrastructure.
Okay, so we've got Load Runner for stress testing, Site 24/7 for cloud monitoring, Manage Engine Applications Manager for those hybrid setups. Are there any other tools that we should have on our radar?
Yeah, a couple more. Paceler PRTG and Datadog are both really solid options. They're kind of like Swiss Army knives for monitoring. They can do it all.
Okay, so if you want a more all-in-one solution, those are good ones to check out.
Exactly. But, even with all these amazing tools at our disposal, it's important to remember that they're only as good as the person using them, right?
Meaning it's not enough just to have the tools, you have to know how to use them effectively.
Exactly. And a big part of that comes down to understanding how to configure your VMs for optimal performance.
Okay, so let's dive into that a bit. What are some of the key configuration considerations that often get overlooked?
So one that's really important, especially in virtualized environments, is new MA configuration.
New meme. Remind me what that stands for again.
Non-uniform memory access. It's basically about how your VMs access the physical memory in your system, and it can have a big impact on performance.
Okay, I'm not going to lie, that sounds a little intimidating.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. Think of it like this. Your system's memory is kind of like a network of highways, right? And your VMs are like vehicles traveling on those highways. NMA configuration is about making sure those highways are designed for smooth, efficient traffic flow.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. So are there specific things we can do to optimize those memory highways?
Yeah. There are two main approaches to NMA balancing: automatic and manual. Automatic NUMA balancing is like using a navigation app. It generally gets you where you need to go without you having to think too much about it.
Okay, so that's probably the easiest option for most people, right?
Yeah, it's a good starting point. But if you really want to fine-tune things, manual NUMA balancing gives you more granular control. It's like planning your own route on a map. You can optimize for specific destinations and traffic conditions.
So if you're willing to put in the time and learn the ins and outs of your system, manual UMA balancing can give you that extra edge.
Exactly. It's more advanced, but it can be really powerful if you know what you're doing.
Got it. So NMA configuration, that's a big one. What else should we be thinking about?
Another one that often gets overlooked, especially in hyper environments, is enabling something called Hyper-V integration services.
Hyper-V integration services, okay? And what do those do?
So they essentially enhance the communication between your host operating system, which is the main operating system running on your physical server, and your virtual machines.
Okay, so it's all about improving the communication between the host and the guests.
Exactly. And better communication means better performance, fewer hiccups, everything just runs smoother.
That makes sense. It's like making sure everyone's on the same page and speaking the same language.
Exactly. And then one last thing I wanted to touch on, and this is something that a lot of people overlook, but it's really important to establish performance baselines for your VMs.
Baselines. So you mean like benchmarks to measure against?
Yeah, exactly. You need to know where you're starting from if you want to know if your optimization efforts are actually making a difference.
Okay, so don't just assume that tweaking a bunch of settings is automatically going to make things better. Measure, measure, measure.
Exactly. It's like tracking your progress in the gym. You need to know your starting weight if you want to know how much weight you've lost.
That's a great analogy. So we've got all these amazing tools and techniques for boosting VM performance, but it sounds like there's a lot to consider, a lot to learn, and I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, this is great information, but where do I even start? So much of what we've talked about today has been about tools and configurations and, some pretty advanced stuff. But I'm wondering, are there things that everyday VM users, people who aren't necessarily tech wizards, are there things they can do to improve performance?
Oh, absolutely. You don't have to be a coding guru to make a big difference. A lot of it comes down to just having good habits.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one of the most important things is right-sizing your resources. It's like Goldilocks, right? You don't want too much. You don't want too little.
Okay, so don't just throw a ton of RAM and CPU cores at a VM and hope for the best.
Exactly. Over-provisioning can actually hurt performance just as much as under-provisioning. It's about finding that sweet spot based on what the VM is actually doing.
That makes sense. What about staying up to date? How important is that?
It's huge. And, it's not the most exciting thing keeping your software patched and up to date, but it makes a world of difference. Those updates often include performance improvements, bug fixes, security patches,
Yeah.
all sorts of things that can impact how well your VMs run.
So it's worth taking the time to do those updates, even if it means a little bit of downtime.
Absolutely. Think of it like taking your car in for regular maintenance. It might be a bit of a hassle in the moment, but it saves you from bigger problems down the road.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so we've got right-sizing our resources, staying up to date.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Yeah. Another thing that often gets overlooked is regular assessment. Your needs change over time, right? The workloads you're running on your VMs might change, so it's important to go back and reassess your configuration every so often.
Instead of just setting it and forgetting it.
Exactly. You might find that you can free up some resources, optimize some settings, make things run even smoother. It's like cleaning out your closet. You might be surprised what you find in there and how much better things run once you get rid of all the clutter.
So right-sizing, updating, assessing, it all comes back to this idea of, like, digital hygiene, right?
Exactly. Keeping your system lean and mean. And that includes regularly deleting unused files, applications, even entire VMs if you're not using them anymore. All that digital clutter, it can really slow things down.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like we've really gone under the hood and learned so much about how to squeeze every last drop of performance out of our VMs.
It's been fun. And what I hope people take away from this is that optimizing VM performance, it's not magic. You don't have to be a technical expert to make a difference.
It's about understanding the basics and then, like you said, establishing those good habits.
Exactly. And the best part is, even small changes can make a big difference. So don't be afraid to experiment, try things out, see what works for you.
I love that. So to our listeners, if you're feeling inspired, pick one thing, just one thing that we talked about today and try it out. You might be amazed at the difference it makes.
Absolutely. And if you want to dive even deeper, there are tons of resources out there. Articles, forums, communities. Don't be afraid to reach out, ask questions, keep learning.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mhm.
A huge thank you to you, expert speaker, for joining us today and sharing your expertise. This was awesome.
My pleasure. Always happy to nerd out about VMs.
And to our listeners, as always, thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the world of tech.